And welcome to another edition of Gridiron Nation on TSN here from Football Island. I'm your host, Jim Mullin. And as always, we're going to bring you an update on Canadians in the NCAA, all the latest on U Sports. And we're going to have Pete Dyakowski on later. I don't think he's going to agree with our panel from a few weeks ago on the CFL rule changes. But first, Gord, let's talk about Canadian receivers in the NC2A. And Nic Cenacle really stepped up for Hawai. The South Ontario product has been a little quiet at the start of this season, but it was nice to see that he popped up on the charts.
Yeah, I mean, we had high hopes for Cenacle coming into the year. It looked like he was in a good situation. He was coming off a strong year last year as well, and he's battled some injuries, and so that I think it has affected things a little bit. But the other thing that's affected things is that Hawaii appears to have a deep receiver room. Pafili Ashlock looked like their main guy prior to this past weekend, and he was very quiet this past weekend, whereas Cenacle and one of the other guys popped up and put touchdowns on the board instead. So it is a high-flying passing attack at Hawaii. So I expect you'll see a few more splash weeks from Cenacle. I don't know if you're going to see consistent big weeks from Cenacle, but I think you should expect a couple more big splash weeks on a Hawaii squad that is surprisingly strong this year. They only got one conference loss in their first four, so they're right in the thick of things in the Mountain West. And CFL alumnus Timmy Chang is doing a great job as the head coach at his alma mater and the tutelage of their quarterback Mike Alahado.
Well, there's a number of wide receivers out there that carry the Canadian passport that have had some days and had some great seasons in the past, but I think you could put them all in a milk carton these days and not find any of them. It's been frustrating, hasn't it?
It has, and I mean, we've also lost a few veteran receivers that we were tracking for multiple years. I think of the likes of Keelan White, for example, and so there hasn't really been anybody to step up and fill that vacuum. And Nolan Ulm is another guy who you're hoping to see a little bit more of this year, and it just hasn't quite materialized. I think he fits the theme of what we've seen with several of our Canadians down south this fall, which is that they're kind of a victim of not being on a very strong team. In Ulm's case, that offense just isn't really producing across the board. And we've seen other examples of that, of guys that are just, sometimes they have their own decent individual performances, but their team is just not really worth talking about much because they're not really doing a whole lot.
Louisville over Miami this past weekend. That was your game of the week in the NCAA, and it wasn't just because there were three big Canadians involved, both on the defensive side of the ball. Bring us up to speed on the results of that game, and we certainly don't want to see Akeem Messidor start to struggle with injuries again like he has in past seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, that's the big narrative coming out of this game. The big thing to watch is what happens with Akeem Messidor, who left that game early with an injury. It's too bad because he was performing really well prior to that injury, racking up 5 tackles before leaving. So, he's obviously, we've talked about him at length. He's had a great season. But the real story coming out of this one is the Louisville Cardinals. And I stopped short of calling this an upset special last week, but I did say that if I had money to put down, I would put it on the points with Louisville because I felt like they were kind of being overlooked after a pretty strong start to the season. And sure enough, they fulfilled that promise. Chris Bell was huge in this game, a guy you're definitely going to see in the NFL next year. He blew up. And on the defensive side of the ball, what can we say about Rene Conga? For a guy that plays in the interior, he is just constantly disruptive on that Louisville front. Just keeps doing his thing week after week. Another, I think, 4 total tackles this week, which doesn't jump off the page. But you look at his PFF grading, and he is the 8th ranked defensive tackle across the entire country right now. He continues to be playing at a very high level, and I think is getting to the point where he's starting to play himself into serious NFL conversations.
Hey, now it's time to take a look at Border Ballers and see what Canadians were doing around the NCAA with Alex McComb.
Welcome back to Border Ballers, where we believe kickers are people too. Like Quebec City's own Samuel Tremblay, who's been perfect so far this season. Maine's kicker has gone 9 for 9 on field goals and 17 for 17 on PATs, including 5 from 30 plus and a 45-yarder on Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. Tremblay had a bye this week, but he definitely earned the rest as he has the longest active field goal streak in the FCS this year. Let's move to the defensive line where Junior Poyser is having a breakout season at Buffalo. Brampton's own had 4 tackles, including a TFL at UMass this weekend. He started the season with a sack in 2 straight games and currently has a 17.3% pass rush win rate. That's 4th among all D1 interior linemen with 100-plus pass rush snaps this season, according to Pro Football Focus. Let's close it out in the Big Ten, where Oregon was one of the last teams without a fumble until Jetty Led popped one loose for Rutgers this weekend. The Mississauga product now has a forced fumble, a blocked punt, and an interception this year on a team with loads of Canadian talent. That's it for Border Ballers. I'll see you on Saturday.
So, Gord, you've got a pretty wide selection for NCAA Canadian of the Week, most of them coming from the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and a couple guys that fit that mold of what I was talking about earlier in the segment, where they had excellent days, but it wasn't a banner day for their teams. Darius McKenzie was excellent for South Alabama, but they lost again. They're now just 1 win on the season. Malcolm Bell was really good for Michigan State, and I'll talk about him a little bit more later in the program, but they lost again. So it is a bit of a tough week. Ty Benefield continues to be the alpha on the Boise State defense. They had a big win over UNLV this week, but because we haven't had the chance to talk about him much, I will bring up Nic Cenacle here. 7 catches, 70 yards, and a house call for Cenacle. It's the first real production of note for him since basically week 1. It's really nice to see him back in the fold, and as I alluded to earlier, this Hawaii squad is giving you reasons to watch them and stay up till the wee hours of the morning most Saturdays. And so if you do, keep an eye on Cenacle moving forward.
When we come back, it is Timber in the Forest City. Stick around.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by Crown Produce. Keep it fresh, Canada.
And welcome back to the nation, everyone. Well, it was a Forest City beatdown. I don't think anyone saw this coming, Gord. Laurier and Western, and Laurier just took the wood to the Western Mustangs in the last game of the regular season for both of them. Laurier leaves the regular season at 8-0. Western smarting now at 7-1. Wouldn't be surprised to see the two of these teams into the Yates Cup again. We'll get to that in a second. But what is your take on the dominance from the Laurier Golden Hawks?
Yeah, I mean, I would use the word shocking to describe what happened in London this weekend. I texted a friend during that game, and the text just said, Western? What's going on? I saw the London Free Press pointing out that this is the first time in the entire Grade Marshall era that the Mustangs have lost by more than 20 points at home. And frankly, they scored late in garbage time just to put some more points on the board in this one. This was a beatdown as you characterized it. And I would say that the offensive performance by Laurier isn't necessarily shocking. It's exceptional, but not shocking. We've talked on this program about how good Cal Wither has been this year. I think for me, what really stands out is the performance of Laurier defense. And it wasn't really an individual standout, but a collective effort. 9 passes broken up by this Laurier defense. That's a fantastic job by the veteran defensive coordinator, Ron Moorkirk, a guy who's been coaching in the U Sports ranks since the 1980s, puts an excellent unit on the field every year. They did a fantastic job. And on the Western side, there's some real questions starting to enter in because that's now 2 times in the last 3 weeks. We've seen 2 of the worst performances of Evan Hillock's career in the last 3 games. And they've put up 0 touchdowns while he's been in the game. Both of these, he got yanked from this game in the 3rd quarter. It was exactly as much of a blowout as it sounded, and a resounding statement victory for Laurier, who now has home field advantage throughout the OUA playoffs and a squad that is rolling, looking to repeat as Yates Cup champions.
Now, I don't want to discount Windsor's path to a potential Yates Cup, but odds are that these 2 teams meet again in the Yates Cup. What sort of changes, if Western moves through to the Yates Cup, do you think we should see to that Western lineup? You touched on Evan Hillock. He's a guy that's going to get a start, but is he on a short leash?
Yeah, I mean, quickly, I do think you're correct that a looming potential Western Windsor rematch in a couple of weeks' time in the OUA semi stands out as a really interesting potential game. But I do think Hillock will likely get the start on a very short leash because this has been a couple weeks, like I said, of weak performance with a York victory that was really driven by the running game sandwiched in between. So that's one thing that Western can still do against most teams, though, is they can really lean on that rushing attack. So if they can create enough explosive run stuff to keep the weight off of Hillock's back and simplify things for him, then I think they'll be in good shape. But they fell behind early in this one, and it felt like they needed to be a little bit more vertical in the offense than they would like to be. This Western squad in the Marshall area has always been built to front run, right? They are led by the rushing attack most years, and they are built to front run. When they fall behind, they can sometimes struggle. So I think getting off to a quick start will be key, not only for Hillock himself, but also for the Mustangs on the whole.
This is one of the years where Canada West is going to have a 3-5 team make it into the playoffs, but 3-5 teams in the Canada West can actually do some damage. Let's sort out the knot that we have in the Canada West standings.
Well, and unfortunately, it might even be, there is a scenario where there's a 2-6 team making the Canada West playoffs. Them having any success at 2-6 would probably be unprecedented, but you've got 3 teams in the mix for that final playoff spot. Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Regina have all clinched. Saskatchewan and Regina are dueling it out for the first place and home field advantage throughout the playoffs in the conference. So Regina plays UBC at home. They need a win and a Saskatchewan loss. They're also at home hosting Manitoba. So that's going to be a couple really interesting games for the back end of the playoffs. Calgary and Alberta play each other. UBC with a win should be in. They have a tiebreaker over Calgary, and Alberta can only get to 2-6. So UBC is essentially winning, they're in. On the other hand, if UBC loses, which they're probably likely to do, Alberta wins, you now have a 3-way tie at 2-6, and then start crunching your calculators and figuring out how it goes. So it's a bit of a mess at the back end of that Canada West playoff. But as I saw this past weekend firsthand at UBC, those bubble teams, they can compete with the top end of the conference if they stay out of their own way. The problem is, like for UBC in particular, they just have had a bad habit of constantly getting in their own way.
Who is your U Sports Player of the Week this week, Gord?
I'm going to have to shout out Silas Pignon, the quarterback at St. FX. He broke the record for the all-time AUS passing yardage, beating CFL Hall of Famer Larry Justanis for that mark. So a big career achievement for him and the X-Men, who look to be sitting in the driver's seat with a big game looming in St. Mary's this upcoming weekend to determine first place.
When we come back, we'll talk to the smartest guy in Canada. That's what they tell us. Stick around.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by NFL Canada.
High school football coaches nominate your players for the NFL Canada Way to Play Awards. Each week, winners earn a $3,000 equipment grant for their school program. Show us game footage that highlights safe, proper technique, and impactful play. Winners announced weekly on NFL Live and on NFL Canada's social channels. Learn more at nfl.com/CA Way to Play. And welcome back to Gridiron Nation, everyone. Well, when we talked with our panel about potential CFL rule changes a couple of weeks ago, our panel was fairly on board with it. They saw it through a technical lens. They saw it through a business lens. They certainly didn't see it through a cultural lens. I think one guy that does see it through a cultural lens and maybe a different type of football lens is Pete Dyakowski, who joins us here on the Nation. First of all, Pete, we are honored to have the smartest man in Canada on board. I'm sure that's a title that's going to follow you through the rest of your time on this earth.
You know, I could have worse things pop up when you Google me, so I don't mind. It was quite a few hits the head ago, and I've got a lot of friends who remind me that it was over a decade since, but I still have the trophy. It's just behind me. I have to pull it out from time to time if we've got, say, disagreements around the house. But aside from that, it doesn't get used too much.
Yeah, you're a guy that played high school football in BC, played 4 down American football. You played at LSU, 4 down American football,
Tigers.
right? And then you come up to the Canadian Football League, but you're very passionate and you've expressed yourself on a daily basis, being positioned against these changes that have been proposed by the Canadian Football League when it comes to rules. You've seen the strengths and the weaknesses of both rule sets. Why are you so passionately positioned to defend the Canadian rule set?
I love our Canadian game. I grew up watching it, going to BC Lions games. I was a little disappointed in high school that we played the American rules. The reason being, I believe, if my history is accurate, Vancouver College, my high school, was the first or one of the first high school programs in British Columbia, and the only teams that they had to play were south of the border, Bellingham and Seattle. And so we adopted the American rules there. And then I got to go to college. I thought I was going to go to UBC. I did attend spring training camp in 2001 as a UBC Thunderbird, but I got a scholarship down to LSU, and I had a wonderful experience. I really enjoyed my time, and I appreciate the United States of America for giving me a home away from home for those 5 years. But when I came up to play here was a tremendous honor. My first start was at BC Place, our fourth game of the season. It was in Vancouver at BC Place, and it was just one of the great memories of my life. Our CFL game has been part of our culture for over, it's a century and a half now of Canadian football in Canada. Plus, the Grey Cup is a huge event of national importance. There's really nothing that I've got a visitor in my office here. There's nothing that equates to the Grey Cup. You know, the Stanley Cup is most often played in the United States. We have something very special here, and I believe it's important. Symbolism is important. Statues are important. If you want a nation, and so I mean that like things that are representative of our country are important. And the CFL is a symbol of Canada, and the Grey Cup is a symbol of national unity. And we lose what makes us special as a country when we chip away at these things. And there's some big chips going on right now.
So if you hear the argument that's being put forward by those who would like these changes, they say, look, the field's still 65 yards wide. There's still 12 guys on the field. There's still 3 downs. There's still pre-snap motion, right? We've made a few changes and adjustments so we can get more touchdowns and take more of the kicking game out of the game, quite frankly. What is wrong with that? What do you think's wrong with that?
Well, if you asked that same person that question 2 months ago, he would include in his list of things that are uniquely Canadian and vital to the identity of the league, the 110-yard long field, the 55-yard line, which is visually, when you look at our field, one of the most distinctive aspects of it that sets us apart from the American game as something else, as our own thing. The size of the end zones, the 20-yard end zones. So the same person who's saying, well, we're still 65 yards wide, if you would ask them that question 2 months ago, what are the biggest distinctive elements of the Canadian game? The 110-yard field is right at the top of that list, up there with 3 downs, as are the 20-yard end zones. And as we chip away at those things that make us special, and it is convergence with the American rules. There isn't one change proposed that does not bring the CFL substantially closer to the American rules. We have we've eliminated 50% of the difference in our end zone depth. We've eliminated 100% of our our field between the goal line distance. We've eliminated the complete difference there. The game clock, we've eliminated 75% of the difference there. So every single change that we're talking about is convergence to the American game. We're still a little bit different, but it makes me very cautious, and I expect that we are going to see more. This is step one. If you look at the changes that were made, and I'm not against this just as a traditionalist. Let's talk about later on my opinion on the business side of it. But if you look at the direction that we're going, this was a very big step. This was everything that the CFL thought, in their opinion, and I believe there could be disagreement on this point, but that they thought, in their opinion, they could do without having to consult the Players Association. So this was essentially everything in that bag that you could do for sure without having to seek approval from anybody beyond the Board of Governors. And so they went and they changed everything. And so if they're doing that all at once, it tells me there is a step 2 to this.
Let's get to step 2 over on YouTube, because we're in TV land and we're confined for time. So we're going to invite everybody to go over to our YouTube channel as we continue this conversation. But coming up next, our games of the week.
This portion of Gridiron Nation is brought to you by Crown Produce. Keep it fresh, Canada.
There it is, our CFC 50, the top 10 high school programs in the country for this week. By the way, if you're a high school football player born in 2009 to 2011, head on over to CanadaFootballChat.com to register now for the CFC Evaluation Camp Tour. Stop in one of 9 locations across Canada for your chance to play in the 2026 CFC Prospect Game on TSN. And welcome back for the final segment of Gridiron Nation on TSN. Gord, what is your NCAA game of the week?
Well, I wanted to talk about Louisville, Boston College, because we'll have 2 Canadians lining up directly against each other who have had excellent seasons. Rene Conga on the defensive side versus Logan Taylor at guard for Boston College. Unfortunately, Boston College has been awful this season, so I don't really want to talk about them. I do want to talk about Michigan State, because this is a bitter rivalry. It's actually the 10-year anniversary of these 2 teams having one of the craziest endings in college football history, with the bobble punt at the last second for Michigan State to win. And this is far and away Michigan State's biggest rival. Michigan would probably say otherwise with Ohio State in mind, but it is a really bitter rivalry between these 2. And for our purposes as Canadians, Malcolm Bell is the guy to watch, a guy who's been really coming into his own the last few weeks after transferring from UConn and moving up significantly in difficulty level to the Big Ten. Michigan State's been on the skids the last couple of weeks, but Bell has been a standout, and he'll have to be at the top of his game if the Spartans want to pull an upset against the Wolverines.
As for the U Sports game of the week, what do you got?
U Sports game of the week is going to be that game out west, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and Manitoba represents the only loss for the Huskies on the schedule so far this season. When they played in Winnipeg earlier in the year, Manitoba pulled off a fairly surprising victory at that point in the season. Since then, Saskatchewan has been rolling, but they do have questions at the quarterback spot, as Anton Amundrud has missed the better part of the last 2 games with an injury. He was listed on the midweek depth chart this week, which tells me he's not far from returning. But if he doesn't return, Saskatchewan is going to have a tall task with first place in the Canada West on the line.
Thanks for that, Gord. For everyone here on Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullin saying, let's get out to the game.